What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and this video is sponsored by Keeps. So stay tuned, and in the next few minutes, I will tell you how Keeps can benefit you. But before we do, what is the topic of today's video, and what does this title have to do with anything going on right now, right? Because it seems like the theory of like Thanos and mutants and all that kind of stuff, it feels like it's old hat, right? No, and here's the reason why. I think this theory is actually entirely possible now, more so than it ever was before. To a degree, we could argue that maybe Scarlet Witch had something to do with it. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think that there have kind of been a smattering of mutants that have appeared over the course of the MCU's history, a few here, a few there, but not a number of any real note. Instead, I think there's credence to this theory that it's actually a combination of both, that it's basically the snap initiated by Thanos that blinked out half the life in the universe and then brought all that back, that basically brought in mutants as part of the equation. But at the same time, I think it could have something to do with Scarlet Witch and the idea of them appearing here and there, which kind of makes sense, right? I mean, we saw, or at least heard, Professor Xavier in the Doctor Strange 2 trailer. And one of the things that's interesting about Professor Xavier, right? One of the things that's interesting about Professor Xavier, I wonder if they're gonna have him without any hair, right? You would think a man like Professor Xavier would have hair by now. But I think I know why Professor Xavier doesn't have any hair. Because Professor Xavier is not using Keeps. Yes, let's talk about our sponsor for a second. See, if Professor X had done what he was supposed to ahead of time, he never would have lost those beautiful, luscious locks that he undoubtedly have. But fortunately for you, you do not have to make the same mistake. So I don't know how many of you are aware, but 2 out of 3 guys will experience hair loss by the time they're 35 years old, which really concerns me because I'm 37. So I'm coming up on that point, right? Well, the cool thing here is that with Keeps, you can get quality expert care without ever visiting a doctor's office or a pharmacy. And in fact, with their network of expert medical advisors and prescribers and care specialists, all these folks that can help you out, they can make your hair goals a reality. So if you say, hey, I've got this just beautiful fro, this beautiful afro, and I don't want to lose it, Keeps can help you out on that. Not only that, with 24/7 care, every treatment plan comes with a full year of unlimited messaging so you can connect with your doctor anytime you want to. So you can say, hey, Dr. Bro, do you think Thanos was right? Was he right to blink out half the life in the universe? I can't necessarily guarantee that your doctor will say, yes, Thanos was correct. But if you hit up your doctor and ask them about your Keeps treatment plan, I'm sure they can offer all kinds of insight for you to help you reach your goals. So, hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/geekculture or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/geekculture. Having said that, let's get back into our video. So again, thank you to Keeps for sponsoring this video. Here's the thing, right? In Marvel Comics, and it's a super obscure thing that you would only know about if you've been reading long enough. It's something that's only ever been referenced once. Well, kind of twice. There was the motivation behind why it happened, and then there was the result of it happening, right? So there's 2 things, right? The first one is Uncanny X-Men, or really X-Men Annual, issue number 11, and then there is Operation Galactic Storm. These are really, really important when we talk about the idea of the X-Men. Just for reference, I don't believe we're going to be seeing Operation Galactic Storm in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I don't think we're going to see what's happening in X-Men, or at least what did happen in X-Men Annual number 11 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but we can take that concept and apply it, and I will talk about how. So here's the thing. In X-Men Annual issue number 11, we were introduced to something called the Crystal of Ultimate Vision. Now, this was basically an artifact that existed out there in Marvel Comics that if you were able to attain it, it would quite literally grant you ultimate knowledge and ultimate power. The thing about this, though, is the crystal was finicky. It kind of had a mind of its own. It could decide who was worthy and who wasn't. So think of it as something akin to like Mjolnir, right? Thor's hammer. Now, the thing about this is that if you were deemed unworthy by the Crystal of Ultimate Vision, maybe your motivations were selfish or whatever it decided deemed you as being an unworthy person, when you tried to attain the crystal, your entire evolutionary race would be frozen. It would be stuck in place. You would never evolve. You would never grow. You would never progress. You would just be stuck in that evolutionary state. The really good example of this is the Cree race. And in fact, it happened to the Cree. The idea here is that the Supreme Intelligence, who you guys have seen in Captain Marvel, although you got kind of a piss poor explanation of what it is, the Supreme Intelligence is basically a kind of conglomerate of the greatest minds to ever exist, both religious and scientific as well as political, in the history of the Cree Empire. They're all literally hooked up to a supercomputer, and that in turn forms the Supreme Intelligence, which makes decisions and serves as more of the political / theological leader of the Cree race. The idea of the Supreme Intelligence is that it's always trying to find a way to attain absolute power so the Cree can expand its sphere of influence, as any good empire tries to do. Word had reached the ears of the Supreme Intelligence regarding the Crystal of Ultimate Vision, and a member of the Cree race was sent to attain it. That member of the Cree failed the test, and it froze the Cree race in their evolutionary state, meaning they never progressed past how they looked at that particular point in time. It's why the Cree never changed in appearance. However, that was totally done and over with Operation Galactic Storm. So the idea behind Operation Galactic Storm is that this was a war that was initiated between the Cree and the Shi'ar. It was started by the Cree, and the Shi'ar basically finished it. But what the Shi'ar did, for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with that, if you ever played Halo, the Shi'ar are like the Covenant from Halo, basically, just like an empire consisting of a bunch of different races. But the Shi'ar had basically detonated a bomb that was colossal in scale, and it wiped out something like 90 to 95% of the Cree race, just obliterated them. But what it did is it forced the Cree race's evolution to adjust, right? It basically jump-started their evolutionary process, and it sent them into the process of evolving. And that's why, following the events of Operation Galactic Storm, if you ever read comics, then you suddenly started seeing different colors of Cree, pink Cree and blue Cree and green Cree and so on and so forth, because their evolutionary process had been jump-started and they were off to the races in terms of becoming whatever their next stage was going to be. Now, taking this concept and applying it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's evidence here, right? There's evidence here that there can simply be a circumstance whereby a sudden jolt to the genealogy of any one particular race across the cosmos could basically send them into the next state of evolution, right? Now, what's really interesting about this is that in Marvel Comics, there's no real explanation given into why we saw this sudden proliferation of the mutant population in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s going forward, as opposed to in years past when you'd see a few here and a few there, right? You get Selene, you get Gideon, you get Apocalypse, right? You get, Gabriel Shepherd and a few others here and there, some of whom are just ridiculously powerful, and some of whom can just kind of do some cool stuff, right? But whatever the case is, you just kind of saw a smattering here and there. And then in Marvel Comics, with, again, no real explanation given, suddenly in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s going forward, it was an explosion of the mutant population, right? Mutants were just being born everywhere, and there was no real explanation as to why. And there still necessarily isn't, right? Marvel's never really bothered to answer that question, probably because nobody cares. But the point that I'm making is that you can apply all this to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you can say, over the course of the MCU's history, by whatever manner and whatever means, that the X gene was deposited into baseline humanity, right? Maybe as like a failsafe by the Celestials in case like the Deviants and the Eternals fail, right? Maybe just part of their experiment. Maybe it was just the natural evolutionary process, right? Somebody somewhere was at some point going to be born with the ability to do something special, might as well be that guy. Whatever the case is, it doesn't matter. The thing is that like mutants were occasionally born. And then what we got is that instead of like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was this proliferation of the mutant population. That you guys are right. That what had happened is in the aftermath of the Thanos snap, right, half the life in the universe being blinked out of existence and then suddenly coming back, it literally jolted the entirety of the genealogy of the human race and every other race that exists out there. This can bring in a wide array of possibilities, because now it's not just humans who have their X genes activated, maybe it's like the Skrulls, right? So now you get like deviant Skrulls, and you get dire wraiths, and you get like eternal Skrulls, different things like that, right? Maybe it's Kree, so on and so forth, but you start seeing these mutants popping up, or at least mutants among their own races popping up. But specifically with regards to Earth, suddenly that's how people with abilities come into existence. One thing to keep in mind here is that not a lot of time has passed between the end of Avengers Endgame and what's going on in the MCU right now. So it's very, very easy to believe there are people out there who are developing abilities, and for any number of reasons, we simply just don't really know about them. Sword was talking about that in WandaVision, right? People are popping up with powers and they don't really know how to explain it. It was easy to let it slip under the radar. It was easy to not notice, but it's entirely possible that what we're talking about is that you guys are absolutely right when you say that in the aftermath of Avengers Endgame, Endgame, Thanos snapping his fingers, wiping out all, half the life in the universe in Infinity War, and that life suddenly coming back because of the Incredible Hulk, jolted the genealogy of humanity and any other races that existed out there, and basically jump-started their evolutionary process. So now, mutants are being born. The real question you have to ask here is, how did the X gene get there? Conventional wisdom and comic book knowledge would tell us the Celestials were the ones who did it. I don't necessarily know if that's the case. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. The real question you have to ask is, why would they do that in the first place? I mean, at the end of the day, the Celestials basically experimented on pretty much all these different races across the universe of Marvel Comics because they could. I mean, that's literally the answer you get, right? Like, these Celestials experimented on people and basically created like deviants and Eternals and mutants for no other reason than the fact that they could. They were curious to see whether or not these experiments would work. And thank God Franklin Richards was born on Earth, because if he hadn't, the fourth host would have wiped everybody out. So it's just different things along those lines, right? Let's just, those weird little things. Franklin Richards is kind of like the end result of the Celestials experiments, hence the reason why he's this little kid that can alter reality on a universal scale. He's like a universal constant. It's stupid how powerful he is. But nonetheless, right? Let me know what you guys think. And I happen to think about this, and I know that in previous videos, I like shut that down. I was like, there's no way, that's just kind of silly, kind of ridiculous. But giving it some thought, there's a lot of credibility here, and there's evidence to back up this claim. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and make sure you guys check out Keeps, and I will catch you all later. Peace.